Hello and welcome to another edition of CJ and CJ from the Basement. As usual, I'm your host CJ Massey alongside CJ Long.
Today we'll be covering the Baltimore Ravens, a team that finished 12-4 and was able to win the AFC North.
CJ, the Baltimore Ravens, over the past few years, they've really proven themselves to be one of the more consistent teams in the NFL. With 4 straight playoff appearances and 2 straight 12-win seasons, it's easy to see why fans year in year out expect them to be contending for the first 1 or 2 spots in the division. The AFC North has gotten a lot more competitive recently, especially with the Cincinnati Bengals. They've been turning things around, and they really, Ravens fans are concerned with their aging defense. Are they going to be able to continue to compete at a high level? With the likes of the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers also in that same division. It's a tough division, but a lot of what's going to happen this season is going to rest on the arm of Joe Flacco. Consistent quarterback play is going to do wonders for this team, and if you look at Joe Flacco's record in the regular season over his career, it's very impressive to look at. However, in the playoffs, things always seem to fall apart. Obviously, last season with the missed field goal, he had nothing to do with that. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't Joe Flacco's fault. But the team just doesn't seem to put it together when it matters most. And they resemble a lot, of the team that we covered in our last segment, the Atlanta Falcons, where on paper, it looks like this team has it together, but for some reason the Falcons and the Ravens, neither one of them have made that step like we've been expecting to see. And I think the main thing really to look forward to is Joe Flacco finally going to lead the Baltimore Ravens to the promised land.
And you looked at that Ravens versus Falcons comparison, and basically, like you said, they're almost exact copies in terms of the expectations going into the season. The only difference, however, is the Falcons. When a fan looks at the Falcons team, they look at their high-powered offense and their mediocre defense.
Yes.
With the Ravens, you're looking at a high-powered defense and a mediocre offense. As you said, Joe Flacco's consistency at quarterback is really going to be a big question. Last year, he finished 18th in the league in terms of passer rating, something you normally aren't going to see from a team that made it to the second round of the playoffs. And from there, of course, they lost to Tom Brady, who obviously wasn't 18th in the league in passer rating. So, Flacco throwing for 226 yards per game, 20 touchdowns and 12 picks. You'd like to see those touchdown numbers go up a little bit. I mean, tomorrow we'll be covering Ryan Fitzpatrick. Even he threw 25 touchdowns for the Buffalo Bills. One problem with the Ravens offense, 15th overall in the NFL, right in the middle of the pack. And normally, as you see with like the Giants and Patriots, who made the Super Bowl last year, they're in the top 10 in terms of their offense. So right now, the Ravens are riding on their defense, 3rd best in the NFL overall, 2nd best in run defense, and 4th best in pass. So the question really begs, like you said, is Joe Flacco ready to step up? I mean, he doesn't have an abundance of weapons around him in terms of wideouts. Torrey Smith, a weapon, and a Ray Rice in the backfield, definitely a plus. But Flacco doesn't have the weapons that Ryan had in Roddy White or Julio Jones. So it'll really be a question. We discussed this before the show about the offensive line. The offensive line, middle of the pack, allowed in the 30s in sacks last year. The offensive line is going to play a big part in protecting Flacco's blind side. Bryant McKinney, who came over from Minnesota, ended up allowing a lot of sacks last year, struggled, and one of the reasons he was cut from the Vikings was because he was out of shape coming into camp. So we'll see if he was able to get back in shape, be the anchor on the left side of that line that the Pro Bowl left tackle used to be, and give Flacco a little bit more time to hit his average receivers. And we'll see. The Ravens, once again, 12-4 last year. Same expectations this year, if not more so. Pretty much returning the exact same team.
Yeah, you mentioned Flacco maybe not having the weapons as a Matt Ryan or some of the other big quarterbacks in the league have. The way that they use their tight ends really, it kind of shifts the focus away from, okay, they've got Torrey Smith, and he's a rising star, and we'll be hitting on we'll be hitting on his subject here later on in the show. But the way they use their tight ends and Ray Rice, especially out of the backfield, if they can use Ray Rice out of the backfield, they don't have to necessarily have the all-star wide receivers, but the offense. What was a concern at one point, all of a sudden is now day to day being able to keep up with the defense, and we'll see if it continues in 2012.
Yeah, and one thing that we would like to hit on is the Ravens really didn't do anything in free agency. They lost a few players. Ben Grubbs, a guard. They lost Redding and Johnson, a defensive end and linebacker. So they lost a few things, but we'd like to hit on that they addressed those issues in the draft. Their first-round pick, Courtney Upshaw, the outside linebacker from Alabama, is looking to come in and start and hopefully relieve a little bit of pressure from Ray Lewis and an aging veteran, and to join a linebacker corps that is already one of the most dominant in the entire NFL. With the loss of Grubbs, they were able to add a guard from Iowa State, Kelechi Osemele, and he's looking to step in and start right away, a second-round pick. So they addressed two needs in their losses with their first two picks, and that's something you want to see from a team. Overall, NFL.com gave the Ravens a draft grade of an A-. So overall, a pretty good draft for the Ravens, and their top two picks looking to step in and start right away. Osemele on the offensive line. We'll discuss the offensive line as well as some wideouts and a few more points of the Baltimore Ravens coming up on our next segment of Massey's Main Points.
Hello and welcome back to CJ and CJ from the Basement. I'm your host CJ Massey, and to my left is NFL analyst CJ Long. This segment here is called Massey's Main Points, and the first main point that I want to discuss tonight involves two former Miami Hurricanes, Ed Reed and Ray Lewis. Both of them are aging, and the team needs them to perform at a high level. Will they be able to perform at that high level this year?
Well, no question that they're some of the best at their position, but the question really comes in terms of, are they going to be able to stay healthy? Ed Reed, fortunately, was able to play 16 games last year, saw a nice increase in his tackle count. However, his interceptions decreased. He only had 3 interceptions to go along with 8 pass deflections on the year. So a decrease in terms of ball hawking ability, but, teams might be trying to avoid him. In terms of Ray Lewis, he missed 4 games last year, had 72 total tackles, a big decrease from the year before when he had 105. Granted, he did play every game, but health is definitely going to be an issue with these two veterans. Lewis is getting ready to enter his 17th year in the NFL, 37 years old, and you don't really see anybody ever do that for that long. A position that requires a lot of physicality and heart. Ray Lewis definitely has both, but eventually his body's going to start to break down. And I'll tell you, Siege, I think they did a nice job in the draft addressing an issue at linebacker with the drafting of Courtney Upshaw from Alabama, an outside linebacker at Bama. We'll see if they try to work him at the same position across from Terrell Suggs, or whether they try to mold him into the successor for Ray Lewis for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, and with Suggs is dealing. He's got the major injury.
Yep.
Maybe the draft pick is going to come in and actually take Suggs' place if Suggs is indeed out. For the entire length of the season. My next main point I wanted to get into involves the up-and-coming star wide receiver Torrey Smith. He's got Anquan Bolden there, and Bolden hasn't been great, but a key for Bolden's improvement, and especially in his numbers, would be if Torrey Smith can come in and become a star. Does he have the star capability? Is he ready for that?
Well, Smith was really able to burst onto this scene last year due to the injury of Lee Evans. They traded to the Bills like a 6th-round pick to get Lee Evans, so they figured they got a steal in a deep threat. Has led the NFL in the past 4 seasons in terms of receptions over 50 yards for the Bills. Unbelievable deep threat with the speed but they were able to get him cheap. And the first game of the year, he goes down with an injury, out for the season. And that allowed for Torrey Smith to burst onto the scene. Now, Evans gone. Smith projected to possibly be the number one receiver, for sure the number two, behind Anquan Bolden. Last year had 50 receptions and 7 touchdowns. Really a red zone threat as well as a deep threat.
Yes.
We saw in our last episode Roddy White, 100 receptions and 8 touchdowns. And right now Smith is already knocking on the door. Had a pretty decent playoff, caught the game-winning touchdown in the first round against the Texans. So we'll be able to see if he steps up this year. And personally, I think if the offensive line steps up and is able to protect Joe Flacco and give him time to get in the ball, I think Smith's going to have a breakout year.
Well, that actually was that was my next point that I was going to get into was if the offensive line is going to be able to they had a middle of the pack season last year. What can we expect from the offensive line this year with Brian McKinney? Came in to Viking camp last year overweight, goes over, he leaves. Actually the Vikings got rid of him. He signs and wasn't great. What do we expect out of the offensive line?
Well, a lot of it rides on McKinney's athletic shape. He came into Vikings camp way overweight. If he's been able to crack down and get things back to where they need to be, we could see him return to Pro Bowl form. Once again, protecting Flacco's blind side, that's going to be important. At the center position with Matt Burke, we know they always have a steady center. But a lot of it is going to factor in on guard play. With their second-round draft pick, Osmele, coming in to replace Ben Grubbs, who left the free agency, if he's able to step up, then they could have a big year. A second-round pick out of Iowa State, he's going to have to step up and play big right away, and that's going to factor in. A team, like you said, middle of the road, 33 sacks allowed last year, but also the 12th most quarterback hits allowed. And when you have a quarterback that's already struggling with consistency, getting them rattled and knocked down during the game isn't going to help. So the offensive line this year is going to be a big key. If McKinney comes back in shape and Osmele is able to step up right out of the draft, then look for him to have a big year blocking for Ray Rice.
Well, there you have it. Thank you very much for joining us on Matthew's Main Points. Coming up in our next segment is our Bud Light Bold Predictions. Thank you again for joining us.
Bud Light presents Real Men of Genius.
Real men of genius.
Today we salute you, Mr. T-shirt launcher inventor.
Mr. T-shirt launcher inventor.
Not satisfied with standard souvenir distribution, you created a device with enough kick to dislocate a mascot's shoulder.
Someone get a stretcher.
Courtside, luxury box, upper deck. Your high-powered cotton cannon makes every section the nosebleed section.
Hit the deck.
So simple, anyone can operate it. After a background check, a training course, and a 5-day waiting period.
It only shoots T-shirts.
So crack open an ice-cold Bud Light, marksman of the mezzanine, because we know you'll give us the shirt off your back at 180 feet per second.
Mr. T-shirt launcher inventor.
Bud Light beer, Anheuser-Busch, St. Louis, Missouri.
CJ and CJ from the basement as we get ready to kick off our Bud Light Bold Predictions. For those of y'all just tuning into our segment of shows, this section is where we give a few picks of what we think is going to happen the upcoming season for a select player or the team as a whole, as well as where we think they're going to finish in the division to cap off our episode on the team. I'm going to kick things off. My prediction for the Ravens, I know it's probably not something the Ravens fans want to hear, but I just really don't think Joe Flacco is going to have a breakout year. I think it's going to be mediocre as usual. Once again, with Anquan Bolden performing just about average. Torrey Smith, a number 2, he's still young. There hasn't been a reason yet for me to see that Joe Flacco is going to bust out, and I just don't think it's going to happen again this year. Just look for the same as usual: 20 touchdowns, 12 to 15 picks.
Hey, I can see that, and my bold prediction, definitely not what Ravens fans want to hear. I hate to say it, Ravens fans, but I have a feeling that the Ravens are going to come third in the division. I just think that the Bengals and the Steelers are going to compete 1 and 2, and I think the loss of Suggs and their questions at with Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, their age maybe begin to show this year. And as you mentioned, the inconsistency of Joe Flacco, you really don't know what you're going to get with him. But if they can play, if Flacco is protected, as we mentioned in the show, if he's protected, he plays good, and the defense shows no signs, then that prediction very well could be extremely off. But for now, I'm saying third place in the division.
Yeah, and I really agree with that, CJ. I just don't see the Ravens being able to compete. Like you said, an aging defense and Lewis and Reed, and I think they're definitely on the downturn of their career. Flacco, once again, inconsistent. I'm also going to go third in the division. Obviously, no playoffs. Bengals, they're an up-and-coming team with Dalton and Green. They're only going to get better. They don't really need to make any super big moves in the offseason because they're already right there knocking on the door. The Steelers, I mean, they're the Steelers. And the Browns, well, they just speak for themselves as bottom feeders in the division. But, yeah, like I said, with a team like Baltimore that's on the downturn, with Lewis, Reed, and heck, for that matter, Bolden. He doesn't have a whole lot left in the tank either from what we've been seeing from him the past couple of years. They needed to make a few more moves in terms of free agency in the offseason, and they didn't really address key positions of need to back up those aging players. So we'll see what happens, but we're both going third in the division. Join us tomorrow as we take on the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East.